Now then, Stormblessed, introduce the weather report.
Hello and welcome to FECast 74. I am Stormblessed, your main co-host of FECast, and with me is Sunyveil. Oh wait! Sunny is currently taking a break from Eternal right now, so instead, this is secretly Weather Report taking over. So joining me today are my co-members of the Weather Report, just based on our usernames. I have with me Tempest Dragon King. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. I would. I haven't been here for a while, but now I am.
Are you ready to talk about all the fun brewing that can be had in Eternal?
Yes, very. I am so ready.
And also replacement Sunyveil, I guess you both are equal to one half of a Sunyveil potentially, is my other friend, a Stormguard 798. How are you doing today, Stormguard?
I mean, if you put together the amount of day twos that we have, I think we might be less than Sunyveil. Like, not much less, but still less. I think TDK is like 2/3 of a Sunyveil, maybe 3/4, and I'm like 1/4, right? But
Excellent.
Yeah, that does sound about right. I mean, you're not wrong. You're just correct.
thank you. Anyway, I am so excited to be here on my very first episode of FECast. I hope I can do everyone justice.
Are you ready to talk about brewing as well?
Absolutely. You know I love me some jank.
Before we talk about that, let's talk about the most recent T&E results, as well as speaking about Expedition briefly. Because of some scheduling conflicts, T&E was today on a Thursday and not tomorrow on a Friday. We are recording this after T&E has already happened. It was an exciting T&E, the first Expedition T&E after the patch, I believe, the big balance patch that shook up everything and destroyed the metagame as we knew it. And in the finals, we had Croge versus Jez, to which Croge ended up winning with a Azrog Praxis deck over Jez's Soldier deck. I know that you were in T&E today, so what was that like? What was Expedition and T&E like?
It was a trip. I brought a Xenon list based around supply lines and Kanya Ironsword Envoy, and I tuned that. But even after tuning it, it wasn't very consistent. Not as consistent as the big decks out there. That Praxis Azrog deck, Huru, and Tradition Soldiers, and, surprisingly, Honor. And there were also some Found Control lists.
Just to specify, Found Control oftentimes is playing Davia and Fall to Ruins, and utilizing Davia as a way to gain card advantage, and Scrap Find Skimmer, either to put a blocker, provide a threat, as well as discard spells for Davia. And then Soldiers is just your classic Soldiers stuff. And Honor Pile, these seem to be four of the best archetypes currently in Expedition.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how Expedition shakes out. You know, there's still a long time between now and the final Expedition Open with this format, as well as a number of T&Es to see how the Expedition metagame breaks down for those. I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of Expedition format shakeup. There's still many rooms to go in Expedition, and we'll all be waiting to see how the format shakes up as the weeks continue.
I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see them have another balance patch or two.
We also have another exceptionally exciting thing. Teased, not spoiled by any stretch. Scarlatch on the main Discord confirmed that the script for the next campaign is complete. The campaign called Hour of Glass.
The name is utterly delightful.
Oh, the name is absolutely great. I mean, clearly the name is going to be outlining, what the Queen of Glass is doing, maybe why she's trying to take down the Bastion. Hopefully this will end, the future of Miria, and we can go back to the present day time frame. Maybe get a new jet card or two if we go back to the present.
Yeah.
Everyone wants more jets, right?
Yes, of course.
Another exciting thing, of course, is that this is a campaign and not a bundle, which means we get some fun single-player content. So this is somewhat controversial in the community, actually. How do you both feel about campaigns versus bundles?
I prefer bundles, mainly because I don't typically enjoy playing through a lot of the single-player content arc storylines that make me play with really bad decks. So in that sense, I'd rather just take all the good cards, play the good cards, and then, play the good cards in a good deck. That's how I enjoy playing. I think that a lot of people whom are more invested in like the lore or story side of things really appreciate the campaigns as a way to expand upon the main story that's provided in the sets. So I think it'd be nice to have the option to like just opt out and just like, hey, I just want all my cards, give them to me. But if you wanted to play through the campaign, that you have the option of going through each individual storyline, going through all the characters, and so on and so forth. Campaigns aren't really for me, but yeah, I can definitely see the appeal.
You said you don't like, when you get the pre-made decks, and I feel like that's more than fair. Especially there was that one campaign where some of the decks were just really brutal. I heard like people played the game like 10 times before Direwolf decided to nerf the enemy and buff your own deck. So how do you feel about campaigns though, where you get to build the decks yourselves?
I'm fine with either one, and I love the campaigns, honestly. I love lore. I can't get enough lore.
Stormguard, how do you feel about campaigns where you get to build your own decks though with the unique rule sets?
I'm okay with them in terms of like, they usually just add some weird stuff to it. So you need to have like a complement of what you're doing. So for instance, I remember this one campaign where at the time I was really into playing Skycrag aggro. And then the special rule set just added a bunch of defiles into my deck because it's supposed to be like slowly weaving in the corruption as part of the lore and so on and so forth. It's an interesting deck building challenge. I would also like to see them specify what cards are going to be added or what the deck building, not necessarily restriction, but tweaks are, so that if you want to and you want to build like a specialized deck specifically for that rule set, that you are able to. And I know that's something that a lot of people enjoy, especially considering how popular all these events are with all these special rule sets. Like, people like special rule sets.
I was honestly a touch disappointed with Awakening compared to the other ones, but it's still fine.
Yeah, I think campaigns are great. I really like campaigns. I think they're really fun, interesting. I do like the idea, as Stormguard says, of giving people options. Let them get the cards they want to, make the campaign otherwise. And there are some things like, you made the campaign, so you want people to enjoy it. I like having the story progress. I'm a big story fan. So I'm excited. I'm glad that we're getting another campaign, especially since campaigns seem to be where a lot of the story progression falls into. And either way, I'm glad that we're getting new cards in the future. Who knows when it will come out? I'd be surprised if the campaign was out before the next open. I'd even be surprised it was out before the open after that. But I think we'll get it soon after the Revelations draft open. And, I'm looking forward to having some new cards and a new campaign, and it's a good time all around. So
I think we're getting it a bit sooner than that, personally. Maybe between the Expedition and draft open. Maybe a little before the Expedition open.
Well, we will see. And if you were right, I will say that TDK was right. But if I was right, I will be neener.
Sure thing.
We can both do that.
Okay, anyways, now on to our main topic. So, in the past, we have had a couple of episodes about deck building in general. Today, we are focusing around brewing as a concept. So, brewing sort of refers to not necessarily trying to build the most competitive deck, trying to, win every match. It's trying to do something interesting. It's trying to be different. It's brewing. It's trying to make jank together. And of course, at some point, no one knows where the line is. There is a point where jank and brews become actually good meta decks. And, where that line is depends on what your own values are, maybe how much you're winning, how well you do. But overall, brewing is a really fun concept, and I really enjoy it. So let's start things off with Stormguard. So how do you feel about brewing in general?
My approach to brewing is not like, let's find this really jank deck or have this really strange, cool build around. I'm like, okay, this is the most powerful thing, at least in my opinion, that I think I can be doing. How am I supposed to snap this powerful thing in half and make all of my opponents weep in shame? So that when I approach a new set, I don't go like, ooh, supply lines. How can I make like a token strategy work? Or like, ooh, look at that assembly ground. Nice. I'm like, okay, there's a Valise, there's a Prowling Amarok, there's a Dianglo Houndmaster. All these cards seem good. I want to break them. Let's go. So when I talk about brewing in that sense, it's more like, how do I approach trying to break a format?
So my approach to brewing is a little bit different than that, right? I still like doing the powerful things, less so than the fun things in a sense. But I I do kind of have a mix of the middle. It's an interesting approach to Brewing, right? So there's finding the best card and trying to smash that together. And then there's what I try not to do is sometimes I like to try to take a card that I think could be the best card, and then I try to break that in half rather than the obviously best things that are already out there and, make them better in a sense, find the best shell for them. TDK, what's your general brewing philosophy?
I try to have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
I look at cards and I don't go for the worst cards, but I also don't always go for best cards, just stuff that I think would be cool. You can get into some real nonsense when you just remove the bounds of what you think is good and not.
So we kind of have the full gamut here, right? We have Stormguard on one end of the spectrum, TDK on the other, and then I find myself somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So now that we have sort of our big general ideas out of the way, let's go back to Stormguard. Specifically, what are some of your main philosophies when you go into brewing? What are some key ideas for how you brew things, how you build a deck?
Okay, so I'm very, very new to this whole competitive, serious, eternal thing. You guys can't see it, but I'm doing the air quotes with my hands.
Yeah, I can see them just fine. It's a gag, see?
Oh my god. Sorry, I just can't stop laughing now. So a lot of what I've learned is derived from friends or teammates or what have you who have a lot more experience with deck building and competitive card games than I do. So I like to refer to my approach as the U-Woo approach because most of it comes from Watchwolf, which is WW. But if you split the one W in half and move it to the other side, it's a U-Woo approach, which is very in line with me as a normal human being.
Ooh, what's this deck I have here?
Okay.
Someday you're going to call a deck that.
Okay, so when I look at a deck, I start with a 2 or 3 card core. So for example, in the most recent deck that I put together, which was the budget Skycrag aggro deck for the Misplay Meta 15k Shiftstone Challenge, go check that out on their Discord if you haven't seen it already. Plug. I was like, okay, Amarok, Dianglo Houndmaster, Auto Tread. They slapped at the most recent Throne Open. How am I supposed to get those cards to be super good in Expedition? So I was like, okay, I think I want to lean aggro. I want to lean hard on this tandem mechanic that we've got, and I want to empty my hand super quickly. So then I look at what cards can best support this. From my experience playing in Throne, I'm like, okay, solid weapons. Why are weapons good? Weapons allow you to get in for a lot of damage while only attacking with 2 units. Oftentimes, Skycrag decks try to go wide, but that's not necessarily what we're going for here. We're trying to go tall with 2 units, which is why weapons are so effective, because they allow you to push damage that way. So it's like, okay, if this Gemblazer cannon seems good. What else? Gloves of the Pyromancer, really good. Why? Because you can empty your hand, but still get cards in your hand later on at the end of your turn. To pitch with Auto Tread, shove in your market, what have you, right? Really good. Tricks. Tricks are really good because, again, they allow you to push damage while only attacking with a few units. In that case, if we're only attacking with few units and we want to push damage, what is a mechanic that works really well then? Scroll, scroll. Berserk. Overwhelm. For me, I start with a core. I see, okay, I want this card to do this job. I want Gemblazer Cannon, not because everyone else is playing it, but because it gives me Overwhelm. It's a big weapon, which means it'll allow me to get in with my cheap flyers for a lot of damage while still allowing me to trigger the tandem. For every single card that you put in your deck, you need to have a justification and explanation as to why it's there. Not just all the other similar archetypes are playing it, but what does the card do in my deck? If you don't have an appropriate answer for that, it should not be in your deck for more than obvious reasons. The main divergence in terms of how I like to build things is that I always build with a goal in mind. So some people just build their decks and here, okay, this is a rough draft, yeah. And then does it play well into the meta? I have no idea. So when I build my decks, I'm like, okay, I want this to be specifically good against what I'm expecting to face. Whether it's the ladder meta, whether it's a day one open meta, whether it's the TNE meta of the tournament that I'm playing in, I'm like, I need to have a good idea of what I'm expecting so that I can build my deck in order to beat that. So for instance, there was a time in the most recent Throne Open where we thought, hey, everyone's suddenly playing a lot of Skycrag control and Honor control. So how can we, as a Skycrag aggro deck, adjust things so that we can beat a Skycrag control deck? And one of the things that we decided upon was lots and lots of Aegis units, so that it'd be a very big pain in the butt for control decks to deal with it. And that also helped with the weapon plan, right? Because if you want to stick weapons on units, you want to make sure that you're not getting 2 for 1. And having a bunch of Aegis units helps that. When we were thinking about how are we supposed to beat all the Kira decks later on, we were looking at what ways do we have to nullify Aegises? What ways do we have to prevent them from sticking a bunch of spells on one unit, right? That's why we're like, okay, we need to up our spot removal. We want to play a couple of Varas, so on and so forth. If you're not building the deck with a specific goal in mind, then at most you can use it for casual play, because then you're not going to be able to utilize it in the same sense. That's also why, random side note, because I want to, whenever you take a deck off Eternal Warcry or from like the TNE tournaments, keep in mind that the expected meta that that person brought that deck for may not necessarily be the meta that you're expecting. So in the initial days after TJ brought the Feln Mill deck to the Winter Invitational, I saw a lot of it popping up on Ladder, but Kira is not necessarily represented a lot on Ladder. More often than not, you have a massive slant towards aggro decks. So Skycrag aggro, Skycrag Yetis, as opposed to the Kira decks. And your game plan against an aggro deck should look a lot different from your game plan to a Kira heavy meta. And people were not changing the deck lists for some reason or another. I mean, we could elaborate on the processes of like evaluating cards and seeing what cards are good in certain contexts and so on and so forth, but that's a different episode.
Yeah, that's a different topic.
So what I want to leave everyone is just think about your decks more. That's it. Okay, I'm good.
If I may bring it back in sense to connect it to ideas from previous FEcasts, when Stormguard says build with a goal in mind, you can think of this as going back to sort of, what axes are you fighting on, right? Sonny has declared his axes of efficiency or whatever, the 3 axes that you can sort of fight on. And so basically, do you want to, fight for card advantage? Do you want to fight for board advantage? Do you want to fight for some sort of other form of tempo advantage? And you want to push in that direction as hard as possible, right? You don't want to split the difference.
Absolutely.
One of the key things that I noticed is in the previous expedition metas where people built soldier decks, very fast aggro soldiers with Dovin and Daruliz, and they threw Wisdom of the Elders in there. It's possible maybe that was just correct because Expedition has less cards than Throne does, so maybe there was just nothing better. But overall, in a super aggressive deck, you don't really want to have this, clunky card draw. If your goal is to beat down the opponent, paying 3 to draw 2 cards, that's a whole turn that you could otherwise use to develop the board, attack the opponent, remove their stuff. One of the things that, I felt like could potentially be improved with crossbows from the previous Throne Open was that maybe remove the combo entirely. If you remove Sodius Spellshaper, maybe the deck suddenly gets a lot better because Sodius Spellshaper costs 3 and is just somewhat clunky while being expensive to impact the board and, doesn't have the highest amount of impact when you play. Yes, it's not terrible. Yes, it likely can draw you a card, but, maybe there's a better option to help you build with your goal in mind. So I like what Stormguard is saying there. TK, do you have any thoughts about Stormguard's segment on deck building?
Yeah. Let's see here. You can definitely build with plans in mind, but sometimes you'll just run into strange pockets where they're not thinking on the same axis as you. And you'll need to be prepared for those too. There's a lot out there. And there's a lot of ways to go about deck building too. Just stay open to any synergies that you come across too. You never know when one of those might actually be just super powerful.
Would this be some sort of, underused card you might want to build around?
Yeah. Stuff like that. There's actually a decent example of
cards like that, ones that showed up at the open. Scrapvine Skimmer's one of them. That card didn't see much play at all before Davia came around. And then the two went together, and they were like peanut butter and jelly. They just were perfect for each other.
Yeah, so when you see a bunch of new cards being spoiled, or even just looking at the set hasn't been explored, entirely thoroughly. It recontextualizes all of the old other cards, right? So Scrapvine Skimmer is a card that, was relatively weak. But in this new format, in Expedition specifically, where the format's a little bit weaker overall, Scrapvine Skimmer curves right into Davia. New cards recontextualize old cards. If you can do that, you can then get an advantage in the deck building process.
And I love examples like that. Joe and Hurler was once seen as a bit of a joke, honestly, way back in the early days. And then Markets came along.
I mean, Jotun Hurler was nerfed before Markets, if I recall correctly. Like, it was once a 4-4, and it was nerfed to a 3-3, I think, before Markets were out. Jotun Hurler was undervalued initially, but it did get properly evaluated at some point. But then I think people undervalued it again still, even when it became a 3-3. But then Markets came out, and suddenly its market value did increase massively when Markets came out. What are your other big ideas for Brewing, TDK?
You gotta also have a plan for Brewing, but I prefer building around just some cool card. There is supply lines, for example, but there's also that Elysian deck. That actually came about from me going into a personal challenge of trying to brew a deck with Etio, Chief Examiner, which cares about stealth units. It allowed me to explore Elysian Stealth, which is a critically unexplored archetype and one that I think has potential.
So, TDK, how can you generalize your experience with Elysian Stealth to an overall brewing knowledge that you can present to the audience?
So, you don't want to be stubborn and just say, I must have this cool card as a 4-of in my deck. Sometimes you bring it down to 3, 2, or even as a market copy. Just be flexible with stuff like that. You gotta open the door to allow pretty much any synergy that you come across to be an option. Some of them you can evaluate mentally, but some of them you just gotta test with. You gotta play with them. As an aside, it's really fun copying Valiant Guardian with Reflector.
2 Valiants.
Making your spells impossible to cast. It's great.
No.
I have done that before with Charge. Anyways, you gotta open your mind to a lot of cards. And there's also this little thing that I made in the Friends of Eternal Discord that's designed to expand and encourage that. I call it Nikki's Brewing Challenge. Every week, we take 2 random cards, one for Expedition and one for Throne, and decide to make brews with them and make them work. We get to see how all kinds of people can take an interpretation of even a mediocre card and use it in a ton of different ways. And it makes the creativity of the deck building process really shine.
Yeah, the Nikki's Brewing Challenge basically encompasses what TDK enjoys with Brewing in Eternal. It allows people to look at underused cards, try to create their plan to utilize them better, see how much potential they have, and then it's a way of, showing the diversity of thought and potential in brewing in general and deck building about how many different ways of one card can be utilized among the population.
Yeah, and there's so many sleeper hits in Eternal, it's crazy, honestly. The best cards are obviously great, but even the cards that are slightly worse have a lot of merit to them.
I presume the cards in Nikki's Brewing Challenge aren't, the Jeks and the Dovids of the world, but, the tier 2 cards, the tier 3 cards. What's the most interesting card that you saw in the Brewing Challenge as far as card to build around, or just number of different ways that other people have built around it?
One of those would be one of our first challenges, and that would be Murky Tentaclesis.
Ooh, that's a spicy one.
Yeah, that card's real interesting. It's a 5 shadow 5/2 with unblockable, and if you play a card with Destiny, you draw Murky Tentaclesis back from the void. So you can dump it in the void on purpose and use revenge stuff to pick it back up. You can make an entire discard deck around it. You can use it to beat in and use revenge stuff to generate tempo and get it back if they do ever decide to kill it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, Murky Tentacles is a cool card. It's a card that I've only ever played in Draft. It helped me get me to World last year because it was in my really good Stonesguard deck. And, it's the sort of card that could potentially be quite powerful in the right metagame, in the right shell. And so that's an interesting card to brew around. So as we continue our segment on brewing, I would just like to discuss some brewing philosophies of my own. In the past, we have done big episodes on deck building ideas, of FECast. Check those out if you would like to, called Building the Tournament Winning Deck List, parts 1 and 2. I think they were featuring batteries in both of them. My main idea that I love is I love consistency and critical mass, which are slightly different things. I like my decks to be consistent, which is similar, although albeit slightly different than Stormguard's building with a goal in mind. Consistency is basically like, I want the cards to do the same things, or in a sense, fill the same roles. An example of this would be, like Teacher of Humility and Amaranth Stinger both fill the same role while not being the same card. They're different spots of the curve, but they're both disruptive elements. And then critical mass, if you have a synergy section of your deck, you need to have a critical mass to ensure that your synergy works every time when you need it. This is definitely relevant for cards that, you draw out of the deck based on a condition, specifically like Grenahen or Dovid, right? That definitely needs the critical mass to ensure that those cards work. Grenahen, without drawing a card most of the time, is just a 1/3 lifesteal. If it draws a card, it's amazing. If it doesn't draw a card, it's kind of medium. So that means you really want to be able to have 40 hits for Grenahen to ensure it has a 90% success rate in order to make it good. If you have, less than that, it really starts to get rough, especially if you got like 30 hits, then you're only drawing a card 80% of the time, and that's just not really want to be in life.
There's some other examples of critical mass too, like with pledge cards and synergies, and with stealth. Ring of Glamour cares about how many stealth units you play, so you need to be playing quite a few in order to consistently draw the 3 cards off of one Ring of Glamour. And if you do, you can really get the advantage rolling. Similarly, Gunrunner and Glasshopper really care if you pledge cards.
This leads into my next big category, something that I think Stormguard has some experience with potentially, and that is utilizing math and statistics in order to facilitate your deck building in the proper fashion. Basically, not every single one, but most of my good decks, I have utilized math or stats in some capacity in order to ensure the deck building somehow. Whether that's aforementioned Grenahen Dovid, TDK mentioned Pledge. The big thing there was we discovered that, you only need 16 Pledge cards in order to make Pledge super consistent, right? It feels like you might need more. 16 gave you a 95% chance to have a Pledge card in your opening hand across all the mulligans. And, that's about good enough. Even my very first good deck that I built, which was Xenon Sight midrange back in the day, I used a little program to simulate opening hands, and I basically went until I was 95% happy with whatever the opening hand was. It needed a 2-drop. If it's on the play, it can have a 3-drop. It doesn't need a 2-drop. I did all these like scenarios, and finding out how the math and stats work, I think is super important. Stormguard, I think you have some experience with this, right? Because I know that you're part of TJ, and I think they do that sort of thing, right, with the meta breakdown?
Wrong team.
Wrong team, sorry.
Yeah, but with regards to stats and math, I think you should always have it. Because even if, you don't have to calculate, hits for Dovid or hits for Grenahen or so on and so forth, whenever you're building a deck, regardless of what deck or archetype that you're building, you should always be considering math, even if you're not including cards like Dovid or Hen. For starters, your power base, right? Every deck has a power base. So every deck should take into consideration what your power base looks like, how much undepleted power you have, what influence you require, at what point you need double influence, and so on and so forth. One thing that we really didn't like about a lot of the crossbow builds that people brought to the tournament was that they were packing double primal cards, which we felt was really strange. Because if you looked at the power base and being able to cast double primal reliably on turn 3, the odds just weren't there, right? It's not as if we say the crossbow deck has a lot of percentages or critical mass that you need to hit, but If you looked at the math, it's very, very difficult to be able to cast your Amarok's on 2 or your Power Cells on curve on 2 and still be able to cast a double Primal card, Primal of which was your least represented faction in the Crossbows deck. That's something that we elaborated on subsequently. Like, we really, really did not want to include double faction cards as much as possible. So beyond just the power base, another thing to take into consideration is your curve. So as Stormblessed has mentioned previously, say with their Xenon Sights deck, maybe they want removal on 2, removal aura unit on 3, and then drop a sight on 4. So then you need to go, okay, I need undepleted power on turn 2. I can have either depleted or undepleted power on turn 3, but I really, really want to have undepleted power on turn 4. Right? So then you need to say, okay, how much depleted and or undepleted power will I have in my deck to be able to accomplish those goals on curve? Because every deck is always going to have a game plan. The game plan varies from matchup to matchup and individual game to individual game, but you should always have a game plan against whatever matchup you're facing. And that means you need to always take into consideration when you will be playing your various cards, and therefore what power requirements or what setup do you need to be able to play those cards and fulfill your game plan.
In the TBC version of Crossbows that they took to the Throne Open, one of the earlier builds of the deck had Teacher of Humility in place of Amarak. And I believe it was Collector, who's just an Amarak over Teacher. And not only is Amarak just exceptionally powerful, and might just be better anyways, but the biggest change is that it improved the power base significantly. It basically meant that Diplo Seal was always turned on, always made sure it got influence that you needed. And it meant that you didn't have double timing where you had no double influence cards, ensuring that you could cast every card that you needed to when you needed to. Working the influence out improved the deck a lot. Another point, maybe do basic heuristic for power bases, is that if your deck can't function on 3 power successfully, you want to be playing some number of Seek power effects. Probably 4, but maybe you could go away with 2 or 3, but probably 4. Decks that can function on 3 power include Crossbows and Yetis, right? Mono Fire. Decks that can function on 3. Decks that can't function on 3, but you might think maybe would be like Kira. Kira's a deck that really can't function on 3. Kira wants to hit the power drops every turn. Kira works in large part because it has Etchings. If Etchings wasn't a card, I could see a bunch of bad Kira decks that aren't playing Etchings and are playing some other cards, non-Seek power card, and then the power base would just never work and they just lose to power too many times. So basic heuristic is that if your deck can't function on 3 for everything you want to do, you gotta have your Seek powers. That's sort of my basic heuristic for power right now. But anyway, so the last thing I wanted to mention before we started winding down the cast is I wanted to bring up a case study of 2 different cards about how brewing works and how you might go about brewing things. The first I wanted to mention is Decro's Ruin. I'm going to say something super, maybe controversial to everyone. I think Decro's Ruin is a terrible card, and it was overplayed, and you probably shouldn't be playing it. If you listen to the cast, you probably have heard me say this before. But I also think that there is a good Decro's Ruin deck out there. Not necessarily a deck that is good, that has Decro's Ruin in it, but a good version of a deck with Decro's Ruin. For example, a bad version of the deck with Decro's Ruin is Even Paladins. Back when Decro's Ruin was first released, there was just a ton of Even Paladins, and they'd always just play Decro's Ruin on 2, and then you'd kill them because they basically time walked themselves. They lost a turn, they discarded a card, and they spent 2 power. But if you build your deck around Decro's Ruin and make it your game plan, right, when you're using the other relics that make you draw cards, when you're trying to have some finishes like Wrath of Caiaphas, there are ways to make Decro's Ruin into something good enough as a deck. It's a card that you don't want to just throw into a deck. It's not a Valkyrie Enforcer. It's not just a generically solid card. You have to build a deck for Decro's Ruin. I still don't think those decks are that good, but they're out there, and I can respect them as being a good version of that deck. And the other case study I wanted to bring up is Know Thy Enemy, which is a card that I have fond memories of because I broke the format in half with it, and, that's always a great feeling. But, it ended up producing a really, really good deck for Expedition and even Throne. I think it's a really useful way to look at how I like deck building, right? It has all the pieces. You think about the curve, you think about the interaction, you're thinking about what power you want to play, you're thinking about what units you have, and of course it has critical mass of, I think, 24, 25 units, right? Because you want to have enough 4 to 5 cost units that also Can you play off Know Thy Enemy, but not too many because you want to be able to have the rest of your deck being interaction and card draw and power draws and stuff, right? Know Thy Enemy itself being just a powerful piece of a larger whole, right? You can win the game without Know Thy Enemy, or you can win the game with Know Thy Enemy, right? So this is kind of how I like to think about Eternal and game plans. Because the deck has 75 cards, unless you're playing in the market with 8 or more merchants, you really can't build around one specific card, but you can build around the card in a much broader sense. You can't build around it as if you're going to always see it, but you can build around it being your game plan. The Know Thy Enemy decks, that game plan was control the board, use Display of Vision, use Scent of Agent, and of course, having the unit-based interaction, right? All these things came together, all executing in the same similar game plan of this sort of unit-based control deck that wanted to get to large amounts of power, utilize all this in the same capacity, right? None of these units are going to win the game by themselves because they're all 2-power stuff. Diana works well with Know Thy Enemy, right? Both of them fit so well together because Diana draws you a card, gains you the life, gives you the time, as well as it wants you to hit 12 power because it's a win con when it hits 12. Know Thy Enemy. It wants enough time to, let it build up so you can play it for a lot. So both those cards work so well together, and just the combination of everything just works so well. And the other element of it is just working with other people, right? Like the core of the Know Thy Enemy deck was sort of my brainchild, right? But like a lot of it was tuned by the rest of the team and the testing group that was for Worlds. And so like showing your brews to other people, right? Putting them on the Friends of Eternal Discord, just messaging your friend who plays Eternal. If you don't have it, try to make some on the FE Discord. It's a good group there. Join the Discord. It's a fun place to be. And sharing your deck to other people is the best way to make a brew into a stronger brew, right? Because you're only one person and you can get too deep in the weeds. So showing it to other people can be a great way to take a brew and just make it better. So that about wraps it up for our big deck building session. Before we go, as always, I would like to share with you the upcoming events for the Eternal metagame. There's a number of them. Between now and the next open tournaments, we have
TNEs, lots and lots of TNEs. Okay. As resident occasional TO, I'll interject. So next week, we'll have the June 29th Expedition TNE, and you'll see a very, very, very handsome gentleman in the coverage booth next to Telemocos. Then we'll be taking a week off for the July the 4th weekend, because I understand that that's a holiday that Americans celebrate. So after that, we're going to come back to a pair of Throne TNEs on July 16th and July 20th. After that, we will have the July 30th Expedition TNE, I believe the weekend of the Expedition Open. So if you're still stuck on any decks and Expedition that you're unsure of, or like you have absolutely no idea what you want to play, that TNE will be a great starting point for seeing, hey, what is everyone else thinking? What is everyone else playing? Can I make this work myself in approximately a couple hours time?
Yeah, it's super interesting. We've had similar things before of TNEs close to tournaments, but I think I might actually have one on the day of. I think the other one was a different format. But here we have Revelations Expedition Open, the Direwolf Digital 5K, on July 30th to August the 1st. But at the same time, on July 30th itself, we also have the Expedition TNE. That very day, we get to see how the Expedition metagame shakes out in TNE and see how that translates over to the Expedition Open. And that's super interesting and, should shake up the Open in a lot of interesting ways and, make probably a bunch of better decks come to the Open. And then after that, we have another week and a half, 12 days between the Expedition Open and the Revelations Draft Open. On August 13th to August 15th, we have one of my favorite tournaments, the Draft Tournament, and I think that's going to be a huge blast, especially if, and I do kind of expect Daryl to do some sort of draft shakeup. And so those, dear listeners, are the upcoming tournament events that you have to look forward to from a super competitive perspective. And I hope to see some of you there, and I hope to see you all enjoying these tournaments. As we wrap up, I would just like to move things back over to Stormguard for a second and ask him where can they catch you. So Stormguard, I know that you produce a number of content-related objects and have some things to share. So where can people catch you? And what do you want to plug right now?
Okay, so I write some articles over at my blog, occasionally collaborating with members of the community, such as, Stormblessed themselves. I also guest cast on the TNE and help TO for TNE events on occasion. On day-to-day, you can find me lurking in the FE, the Misplay, or the TEJ Discords, usually goofing around.
Do you have anything you'd like to plug in the community, TDK?
I do have something that I like to plug. I hang around a fair bit, both on Friends of Eternal Discord, but also the Farming Eternal Discord, which is a very good place to go if you want to get better at draft. Has a lot of good drafters that are willing to ask a lot of questions, and are willing to answer questions too.
I don't know how many of you listeners are not part of the Discords, but if you're not part of any Discords, there's the main Discord, but I honestly recommend, the smaller Discords tend to be, there's some niceness there, and I think that Friends of Eternal is one of the best places for public communication of Eternal content, and it's a good place to go for just discussing Eternal strategy, Eternal deck building, what's going on, to keep up with tournament chat, as well as obviously we have the Team League stuff, and that's fun to be engaged with. Regardless of the Friends of Eternal Discord, any of the other Discords, the Misplay Discord and the Farming Eternal Discord, are also both great Discords to hang out in and just find a community of like-minded people to enjoy being with. So would recommend any Discord to go to. Before we finally wrap up, I would just like to once again give a shout out to the patrons and our editor. SRFS always does a great job editing, and I would also like to thank all of our patrons. This is the first time that I'll be thanking the patrons instead of Sunny. So there you go. I would like to thank Telemokos, Oddsos, Rubian, Cotillion, Allseed Baba, Work Done Son, Camomilk, Chris Ye, D-Dub, and Yeast Out. Thank you all so much for helping provide continued support for making FECast possible.
Woohoo!
So this has been FECast 74, or rather, Weather Report Episode 1. As always, stay frosty in the friend zone.
Don't get snowballed.
The Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the internet to get better at Eternal. We have players of all skill and experience levels all happy to help each other out on basically any aspect of their Eternal gameplay. And making all this possible is our generous patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support FECast or Friends of Eternal, consider donating at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you in the friend zone.
Can you hear me? Oh no. Okay, hold on. Can you guys hear me? Guys? Darn it. Okay. I don't know how to... Oh dear.
Oh no!
Oh no.
No!
Why?
It's the same thing! It's cursed! Your void connection to Stormguard has failed.
This is the cursed cast.
A lot of just the conversational stuff's gonna probably get removed. Unless that person is gonna have to leave in. I don't know. I'm not SRFS. I don't decide these things. We trust in the SRFS here. Can I tell you my cool card designs though?
Go ahead.
It's a site. So it's a site, 3 or 4 cost site that says your spells in deck, or spells in general, your spells or spells in deck cost 3 more, and it has volatility on it.
Excellent.
Anyway, so Stormguard, you're back.